Welcome everyone. Please make sure to mute yourself. And again, this is recorded, so if you want to turn off your videos, feel free to do so. If you have any questions, put them in the chat and we will read them out loud. And if you need one-on-one assistance, you can call at 612-444-3301, and that's for Project Hope. All right, so Project Hope stands for Housing Outreach Partners Engage. And it is a 13-partner organization collaboration helping people in Hennepin County access COVID resources. And we currently service as a field partner to the MHFA. CMRS has postcards in their office, so it's in Hmong, Spanish, English, and Somali. And if you're interested in receiving any, feel free to put your email in the chat, or you can contact me, Sisai, at cmrsmn.org. This is the faces of Project Hope. And I will pass it to you, Richard, to give an overview of the workshop.
Sounds good. Thank you, Seaside. Once again, thank everyone for joining us today. Just an overview of the workshop. We have our outline up here. We'll start with Josh. He'll talk about his perspective from Housing Link and what they've done to provide us a great resource. We have Rep. Alyssa Hollington from, excuse me, from the 4th Judicial District, our court referee, who will chime in on what's going on with this off-ramp. Beth Bailey from CRMS, part of our Project Hope team, and then myself, who I'll answer questions specific to the Rent Help Amendment application, not only from a landlord's perspective, but I can also answer tenant specific questions as well. So we will get into a quick training on how to register and begin having your properties added, but we also have some time for questions and answers. So if you do have any questions, we'll let our guests decide how they want to handle them. But I do know as far as the Rent Help Amendment specific questions, we'll wait to after the training to ask those questions, if you will, please. And with that, I think I'll go ahead and pass it over to Josh. Josh from Housing Link, are you ready to jump in? I'm not seeing anybody but myself. And
let's do this.
There we go, Josh. Thank you.
Let's do this, Richard. Thanks for passing it over. I'm Josh Dye, the Marketing and Outreach Manager for Housing Link. Housing Link, we're a nonprofit organization, and one of our primary services is our website, housinglink.org, where property owners and managers can list their openings for free on our site, and renters can search our website for affordable rental housing opportunities, and we provide resources, information, and education to help people resolve their housing questions. And one of the resources that we created to help those trying to navigate the transitions related to COVID and the eviction moratorium off-ramp is a 15-day notice letter. So as a part of the Minnesota eviction moratorium off-ramp, one of the requirements is that property owners have to provide renters with a 15-day notice that they plan to file an eviction. And so I want to show you how to find this on our website. And that way, you know where these resources exist broadly, as well as the specific resource I'm covering today, which is a template of the 15-day notice. So if you go to housinglink.org, see at the top there, housinglink.org. And then if you hover on property owners and managers and scroll down to COVID-19, that will bring you to the page that I am on right now. And if you scroll down just a bit, you'll notice it says the Minnesota eviction moratorium off-ramp has begun. And we created a template of a letter you may find helpful, the 15-day notice of intent to file eviction. Now, if you click on that link, it will bring you up to a 15-day notice. So here's what that letter looks like. And this letter was created specifically to satisfy to provide a guide or a resource or a shortcut for you to meet that 15-day notice requirement. And so it's designed for you to fill in your specific information with your renter's information, provide an overview of what they owe, and in that. And then we also added some resources that the renters may find helpful in terms of applying for emergency assistance through Rent Help MN and where to get help filling out those applications, as well as to apply for other government benefits or to contact a free mediator to help with their situation. And so this letter is just designed to be a little bit of a shortcut or provide some guidance or make it easier for you to craft that letter. Now, I saw one of the questions that came in here was around, can you get the notice in a PDF form or another free program format? If we put it in PDF, it would actually not be usable because you have to put your own information in there. But if it makes it possible for you to read it and then create it in another format, that's actually fine. So what I will do is shortly after this training, I will put a PDF version up there for you so that if you need the text to be able to recreate it in a format that works for you, we can make that happen, Calvin. So good suggestion. And I will make sure that we get that saved as a PDF and made available for you. So one thing I want to clarify before we get some guidance from Mariah here is that the state, as a part of their eviction moratorium off-ramp, requires a 15-day notice of intent to file. Okay. The city of Minneapolis has their own permanent regulation of a 14-day notice of intent to file an eviction. And so this letter might provide some help in terms of providing that notice as well. But the city of Minneapolis has a 14-day requirement. The state has a 15-day requirement that will expire once as dictated by the eviction moratorium off-ramp. And then the CARES Act, remember the CARES Act back in the day, one of the first acts related to COVID support. There are some properties that are required to provide a 30-day notice before filing an eviction. And Mariah, can you swing in here and speak to a little bit to the CARES Act 30-day requirement and how it compares to, say, this 15-day requirement?
Yeah, you bet. And I guess, so my name is Mariah Kruger. I'm the Housing Program Manager at Volunteer Lawyers Network, and we staff private bar attorneys at housing court clinics in Hennepin, Ramsey, and Anoka counties. So with regard to notice, I think because I'm a lawyer and lawyers say these types of things, I would say for your own unique individual circumstances, I think it's always good to talk to a lawyer first, because these requirements apply in certain situations for certain time periods and then might not in others. So with this 15-day notice, that's part of the moratorium phase out statute. It applies until October 12th, and it's for non-payment of rent cases only. The City of Minneapolis ordinance began in, I think it was June of this year, and it will continue indefinitely. It's also for non-payment cases. It's a 14-day notice, and in the city ordinance, it specifically says what that notice must include. And both the phase out that we have here and the City of Minneapolis has specific things that those notices have to have in them. Also, for you folks who might live in the St. Louis Park has a 7-day notice that also has specific things that need to be included. Then this CARES Act, just because there are lots of different things that have been going on during this pandemic period. The federal CARES Act had a 30-day notice that applies to any properties that are, and the statute very carefully defines them, but they're essentially any properties that would be touched by federal dollars. So any subsidized program is definitely going to have to provide a 30-day notice. But it even goes to the extent where if you have a Freddie Mae or Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac backed mortgage that was on the house or the rental unit at some point, then that building will also be required to have a 30-day notice to evict any of the tenants. So there's a lot of different notice requirements out there. I would encourage to talk with a lawyer before you try to make sure that you give proper notice in eviction cases.
Mariah, I actually have one question for you related to the CARES Act and the covered properties with the federal funding. So you said like buildings that are subsidized would certainly be covered, or Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. How would a property that accepts a housing choice voucher be impacted by that? Is that not considered a covered property because it's just a voucher? Do you know how vouchers are treated under the CARES Act?
You know, that's a great question. And I'm going to hedge just a little bit because I think there's some room for interpretation. My interpretation would be that because that landlord is getting, well, and I should, maybe the question is, if that landlord is getting a subsidized rent out of that, then most definitely that property, the housing voucher property is. I guess the other question is if it's a vouchered, a privately held building and some of the tenants are voucher holders and other are not.
That's what I'm talking about here. Yeah.
That is going to be the legal question, which I would want to talk to legal counsel. I think if you want to do the belts and suspenders and be careful, go ahead and give that 30-day notice and cover yourself nonetheless. But certainly anybody who has a voucher to evict a tenant with a voucher, that would be a 30 days notice.
All right. Any questions for us before we? Oh, so Rochelle Mariah asked, so if I at one time the property owner had an FHA mortgage, then the CARES requirement would apply for 30 days. If I at one time the property owner had an FHA mortgage, then the CARES requirement would apply for 30 days.
So you're saying that it isn't currently, I'm just going to see real quick. You know,
If you'd also like to elaborate on your question, feel free to unmute yourself and elaborate.
Hi, it's Rochelle. Yeah, so like if I just thought I heard you say if it's backed by like Freddie or May or any of those programs. So say at one time it was like an FHA, which I believe falls under that category, but it's been refinanced out to like a conventional loan. Would that requirement still apply? Pretty much as a question.
You know, and I don't know that answer right off the top of my head. I think if you want to be careful that you'll want to provide that 30-day notice, I'd want to talk to a counselor to look at that individually. My sense is that it's a pretty broad reach, and that if at one time the property has benefited from a federal subsidy, that's really what the intent of the statute was to cover as many properties as the federal government could. But, you know, that one is pretty deep into the weeds, and I would want to have a lawyer look at it individually. I apologize, I can't give a better answer.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
It looks like we have another question from Stacy, and it says, oh, sorry. The vouchers you spoke about, those vouchers are they federal vouchers, or does that also include vouchers or rent subsidizes from such an MFA? Does the voucher have to be federally administered and funded?
No, it's going to be any subsidized properties.
Any other questions?
This is Beth here, and I know that Josh is going to have to jump off the call. And before he's gone, I want to be able to say thank you, Josh, to Housing Link for putting together a template. Appreciate that you recognized the need for that as we're navigating the off-ramp, and for providing that resource to landlords.
Thank you for suggesting it. You should take some credit for the creation of this letter, because I think you were the one who planted the seed in our mind. So thanks so much for being out ahead of that and allowing us to be the ones that seem to get the credit for your idea. So we appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see you later.
Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Megan, and I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Megan.
Okay. I was just wondering, I'm a little confused by the paperwork I need to provide my tenant. I understand that I need to do a 15-day and I need to do a 14-day, but do I need to do those like on top of each other or like consecutively, where they would equal what, 29 days? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and my sense, as long as the notice requirements are met, that a court is going to be okay with that. So, and why I mention them separately is you do want to, so if you have a City of Minneapolis property that is subsidized, you're going to want to take a look at all three of the notice requirements and make sure that you're providing the correct information to meet all of those notice requirements. I don't think you give a 15-day, then a 14-day, then a 30-day, but
that's what I was confused by. And I'm a very first time home. Like I just bought a duplex in December. This is my very first tenant. And I am very confused because we don't have any subsidized or anything. We're just one unit and she had a rent and she stopped making the rent. And then she applied for assistance and has already been told she is ineligible.
mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering if I still need to supply her with a 15-day notice to look into assistance that she's already been denied.
Yes, you still need to provide a 15-day notice that you are going to evict for non-payment of rent. You cannot evict someone who is ineligible for rental assistance until after September 12th. So you still need to provide that notice and you'll need to wait until October 12th.
Okay, how do I guess this isn't probably falling into your guys' category, but I'm curious about if other things are being broken as well. If other parts of the lease are being broken, then am I able to do an eviction for that part? Or
You can
do a
evict
termination of lease?
You can evict for non-payment of rent right now. And there's no notice to evict for non-payment of rent. Although I think the practice is to give the tenant some notice to say,
Right.
you know, I'm going to evict you for breach of lease. I'm going to do it at this time if you want to leave before then. Otherwise, I'm going to be filing it because it does save both you and the tenant costs if you can satisfy or solve your situation outside of court. And I think we are, you know, here through the powers of mediators and using mediators in that situation would be something that I would recommend. And then also talking to a lawyer about your individual circumstance. Breaches of lease need to be material breaches of lease. There needs to be a written or an oral lease, which says that you can evict for a breach of lease. And it needs to say what that breach is outside of criminal acts. So for unauthorized occupants, your lease needs to say that, you know, visitors are limited to X amount of time. This is the number of occupants. Nobody else can be occupying the unit, that sort of thing.
Okay.
All right, it looks like we have another question. It says, can an eviction notice be served on a tenant that has back rent pre-COVID from January through February 2020? Soon after the moratorium is over, provided the tenant has not yet paid the back rent.
Well, right now, evictions for non-payment of rent still are not prohibited. So it doesn't matter when that rent is due from, you can evict for non-payment of rent right now. And what we're really looking at for rent is right now, have they applied and have they communicated about whether they have applied? And it only starts in September, on September 12th, if there's ineligible. Then after proper notice, evictions can be filed for non-payment of rent. You know, I want to, it's interesting, a couple things to look at if the rent is that old. You know, anyways, I would want to talk to a lawyer individually about that because there may be some other things going on in the case, but non-payment of rent cases right now are not able to go forward.
I have a question for you. If so, what is going to happen to what is the help for landlords once they have applied, but due to COVID, we were not able to evict people for non-paying rent, but then some people got unemployment benefits and all that money, instead of paying the rent, they went and spent it. So who's gonna help the landlord that due to COVID was not able to evict people and the tenants are not qualifying for renters help? So who's gonna help the landlords? Because I feel like everybody's helping out all these renters, and that's okay. I'm there for that. But it's a lot of people that were receiving unemployment and help from the government, and the hands are out to help them. But who's helping the landlords? Because I don't think they just telling the landlords, well, you had to go to the collection agency. You're gonna get your money back, because we will not get money back for the collection agency, and it's not nothing that is being told to the landlords. They are losing thousands and thousands of dollars, and it's no help for us. And the only thing is, we are supposed to do all our homework and provide all this information to the tenants, but it's nothing for us, the landlords, and we are losing a lot of money, and we still have expenses too, like reparations for damage to properties and all that. And I mean, it is a website that we need to talk to, because I mean, honestly, I'm getting upset about all these, that we are doing all what we need to do, but the tenants are not.
And, you know, I hear you. And I think one thing that unites both landlords and tenants is it is more difficult to receive the rental assistance right now than we would like. The first thing I'd want to know from your tenant is, have they applied for rental assistance? And right now you can write them a letter and say, I'd like to know if you've applied. And if you haven't, I think you can also ask them to apply, or they can provide you information. You can ask them to provide you, excuse me, I'm going to get the, you can ask them to provide you proof of their application for rental assistance. And right now that rental assistance is primarily through this renthelpmn.org, and it is slow. And the application process is difficult, unfortunately. The landlord needs to be part of that application process. So you should know if a tenant has applied for it. If a landlord does not cooperate with a tenant in applying for it, that money could ultimately go to the tenant. So landlords really do want to cooperate. There is another program out there called the Zero Balance Fund, and that one has gotten, and this is my opinion, has gotten slightly better reviews, and that is landlord driven. So that's something that you could reach out to the Zero Balance Fund and start the process for your tenant. Your tenant ultimately has to be involved in that process, but that's another avenue for you to seek out rental support. And I think there'll be some other monies coming from other programs that might be a little faster than rent help. But really, if non-payment is the reason you'd like to have your tenant leave right now, that is not permitted for anybody who's eligible for rental assistance through October 12th. Now, after October 12th, in order to not evict someone for non-payment of rent, they need to have a pending application with either renthelpmn.org or the Zero Balance Project. One of the other things is, in order to get paid, the tenant still needs to be in the property. And I understand there are pros and cons to this from both the tenant and the landlord perspective. So if the tenant does owe years long of rent, and if your tenant does, you're not the only one in that situation. There are a lot of people out there in that situation. That tenant needs to stay in the unit until the payment is made to you of the landlord. If that tenant is evicted before payment is made, payment can't be made at that point, at least not through the renthelpmn.org program. They're looking at ways that might be changed. And I'd say there are some circumstances, very narrow, but in general, the tenant needs to be there. So just some things to think about. And I want you to know, I hear you, the money is just not coming out fast enough, and it's painful for everyone involved. And it's just a waiting game for so many people. Did I fully answer your question?
Kinda.
Yeah.
Kinda. I just concerned because we have tenants that are avoiding even contacting us, and even, I mean, I have a tenant that literally her sister actually talked to her so that I can explain to her about the Minnesota help. And it's just trying to talk to tenants is very difficult when they are also trying to work and doing all this stuff. So I just don't think that's enough help for landlords on this regard.
And the other good thing is, even if it does drag on for a while, the rent help that's out there right now is meant to go back all the way to March of 2020. So even if there's continued non-payment, for a while, that, those months all should ultimately be paid if they apply for rental assistance. And starting October 12th, if there is not a pending application, then you can move forward with the non-payment of rent case. And your landlord will have, or your tenant will have to prove up that they have a pending application at that time. But once again, the landlord should be a part of that application. And I think there is an end game for you here. Like, there are some dates coming up, and really this is a phase out portion that we're in right now. The moratorium is slowly being phased out. And we've been in this now for 16, 17 months, maybe not that long, but it's been a long time. And we need to ride it out through this phase out. And I do have to say, from my perspective so far, there has not been the deluge of cases coming through the court. And I think I don't think anybody wants that. Mass evictions for non-payment of rent doesn't get any landlord paid. It ends up in moving a lot of people who will just end up with another landlord. So if you can hang with that phase out period, if your tenant hasn't applied, and you can even now, underneath the statute, you can write them a letter and say, I need to know if you have applied, and I want proof of an application that you have. And underneath the statute, that tenant does need to respond to you, or you could file an eviction on them. I'm not sure how productive it would be, because then when you file the eviction, all they need to do is apply for rental assistance at that point. But it would start to get people's attention and, hopefully get them applying for that rental assistance.
Look, Mariah, I actually have another question. The question is, if a tenant has an application pending, but also gives notice to vacate, can the landlord deny their notice until payment is made?
It does behoove both parties if the tenant stays in the unit until payment is made. Right now, the way the system is set up, if the tenant has left before the payment is made, the landlord doesn't get paid, and the rent debt follows that tenant wherever they go after that. And you can always, a landlord can not agree to a request to vacate, and it's just damages at that point that would be added on. I think, once again, these situations are great for mediation, particularly before those evictions are filed. If you can get your tenant in front of a mediator and talk about what's going on. The other thing I see is that tenants are scared and confused is a big piece of it, because there was this rental assistance program last fall. But underneath that rental assistance program, people with federal subsidies did not qualify, so they didn't get it. And there have also been some programs out there that people have applied and haven't gotten a cent from, and just have never heard back. So people are frustrated, and the application process is not easy. It's not going to be easy for landlords, and it's not easy for tenants. But here, what people need to know is they really need to apply, because they can get many, many months of rent. So big checks are written through this program, and they get protection just by applying from being evicted earlier. So there is a lot of education that needs to go on.
Question. My renter stated that she did apply, has not shown any proof as of yet, but you had mentioned that as a landlord, we also have to make our application. So am I going to receive then some notification from whoever she applied to for what my part is? Will I get some mailing that I have to fill out my part? Or when do I know when to do my part, and what would it entail?
All right, is there someone here from RentHelp and then .org that knows more about those internal procedures?
Okay, that was supposed to be questions at the very end then, so sorry about
Yeah,
that.
we'll wait. Macklemore Richard can answer those questions a little bit later. We're gonna move on to referee hoteling.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm referee Melissa Telling. I'm the one of the judicial officers in the 4th Judicial District who covers housing. I also do harassments and petty misdemeanor court trials. And my colleagues, referee Tiffany Cedios and referee Frank Reed, both handle housing matters at this time as well. I was asked to participate in this panel, and I appreciate being asked by the mediators to provide a little bit of an overview of what the court is currently doing and what our plans are as we move forward. So currently we're proceeding pursuant to the new law that was passed, which is found at Minnesota Special Session Laws 2021, Chapter 8, Article 5. And I'm going to put that actually in the chat because we do sometimes have people show up to court and they don't know that that law exists or where to find it. So I put it in the chat for everyone so that you can have access to it. You have to scroll down a ways on the website page to find Article 5, but Article 5 is where you're going to find the information about how evictions are being handled in Minnesota right now. Beth did give me a few questions for today's presentation that she thought a lot of you might have, and so I'm going to try to sort of hit a broad overview of what we're doing and hopefully answer some of your questions in the process. Cases in Hennepin County are not being reviewed by judicial officers before a summons issues. So any case that is filed with the court is getting scheduled and are summonsed. And all of those summonses are going out with a hearing date for the first appearance within the 7 to 14 day statutorily required time period. I can tell you other jurisdictions may be doing things differently. Some jurisdictions are reviewing filings as they come in and determining whether they're going to set a hearing or not. And some have extended the period of time for which you're going to get a first appearance. But at least in Hennepin County, we are not reviewing filings and we are scheduling them within 7 to 14 days. We are going to do our best to schedule trials within the 6-day statutorily required period, unless there's an agreement between the parties to extend that further, or the court determines that judicial administration and economy require a longer time period, which allows us to push it past those 6 days. We will continue to offer services at our first appearances to parties. We'll have the free lawyers available to provide advice and sometimes representation to tenants. We hope to have a resource coordinator who will connect people with financial and housing resources. And then in terms of mediations, we're going to start to do things slightly differently because we anticipate there being an increase in the number of cases we need to hear. And so we want people to be able to access meaningful mediation without having to feel rushed. What we're planning on doing is if the parties want a case scheduled for a trial, so you're going to move forward with a contested case, we're going to send you to a mediation coordinator and they will schedule a mediation for you outside of the court appearance. And then you'll attend a mediation before you have that trial. And you will have to confirm with the court before your trial takes place that you attended mediation in good faith. You don't have to reach an agreement, as we always say, but you do at least have to try. And that's in hopes that we can maybe get some of the trials canceled if you can reach a resolution outside of court. If you learn of a pending COVID-19 rental application, you can request that the case be stayed. So say, for example, you filed something with the court for a non-payment of rent case and you learn that the tenant has now filed for the rental assistance, or they had a pending application when you filed and you didn't know that. Send us a letter, say that you've learned, that the tenant has a pending application. We'll stay the case pending the outcome of the application or until June 1st, 2022, whichever occurs first. Same thing can happen at the first appearance. If you show up and we find out that there's a pending application, we can stay the case. If you have not provided the 15-day or 30-day notice, the court has the discretion as to whether we're going to dismiss the case or if we're going to stay the case. So that's going to be on a case-by-case basis what we do. You do have to provide those notices in writing because the statute has specific requirements of what the notice has to say. So the only way that we can determine that the proper notice was given is if you have it written out and we can see what was in that notice. And some of those requirements include, guiding your tenant to Rent Help MN and United 211. So one of the questions that I thought might be asked is that related to the family move-in exception that existed under the executive orders. Executive orders are currently null and void, and so there is no family move-in exception that currently exists. That was a new thing that was created by the governor's executive order, and that is now gone. At this time, the court is continuing to hear cases remotely. And we will return to in-person hearings as we learn more information from the State Judicial Council, as well as our chief judge for the district. We're guided by them as to how we are going to proceed. We anticipate that probably starting in September, we'll begin doing some sort of hybrid type hearings where you'll have the option to appear in person or remotely, and that we would like to begin conducting trials in person. Of course, all of this depends on what happens with the new Delta variant and the numbers here in Minnesota. I know that there's conversations taking place about masking and what's now going to be required in the courthouses as well. So we sort of play it by ear, and we oftentimes know as much as you do as the news comes out. Our first appearance calendars will continue to be Tuesday and Thursday mornings with 20 cases per calendar until we see that the volume is increasing to a point that we need to schedule more. At that point, we will add first appearance calendars as volume requires, and we are prepared to handle up to 400 first appearances in a week in a worst case scenario environment. And that's truly a worst case scenario. We've never done 400 first appearances in a week. Before the pandemic, we were at about 140, somewhere between 120 and 140 per week, and those were all in person. The Zoom platform, leaves things a little bit more difficult sometimes for court administration. So worst case scenario, we can probably get about 400 a week if we need to. I know some of you are on here who have properties probably not only in Hennepin County, but in other districts. What I would say is make sure you go to that specific district's court's website. If you go to their website, they should have a posting for standing orders. And every other district in Minnesota has issued a standing order related to the off-ramp. Hennepin County has chosen not to do so at this time, but the other districts have done so. And so you can go there, read their standing orders. You'll learn about how they're scheduling cases, how they're making cases confidential, and they are outlining the process for you in terms of how they are going to proceed in their district. So if you go to that specific district, you should be able to get more information there. But that's a general overview of sort of what the court's doing and where we stand. I can answer any questions as it relates to procedure. I cannot answer any substantive questions or tell you what the court's going to do on a specific legal question. But I can answer anything else that you might have as it relates to what the court is planning procedurally. All right, any questions?
I'm just going to ask the Zoom team to do a scan and see if you have any hands raised, see any hands raised.
I do see a hand raised. There's a Sue. There's a Miss Phillips that has her hand raised. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, this is Sue Watlow Phillips from MICA and the National Coalition for the Homeless. The federal treasury guidance allows for landlords to be paid even if the tenant is not there. Minnesota has chosen at this point not to do that. And I'm wondering if there's any recourse in the courts for the landlord to request the court to make the state pay them if the tenant does actually apply for rent help, but then moves out before the rent help is actually provided to the landlord.
So that's a good question. What I will tell you from my purview in housing court. As any of you who appear in housing court know, we have limited subject matter authority. And so the only thing that we can determine is who's entitled to present possession. We actually don't issue any money judgments. We don't determine, you know, how much is or isn't owed. Sometimes we'll issue redemption orders, but if there were an issue with the state not fulfilling an obligation that's a party believes the state should fulfill, then you would need to either go to district court and file a civil action, or, you know, contact the attorney general and see if they would want to get involved.
Thank you.
Looks like we have another question. How are the courts dealing with cases that were filed before COVID?
Sure. So I think that we've concluded all of the cases that were filed before COVID. So last week we added a few initial appearance calendars to take care of any backlog that we had. And so we managed all of those last week. If you still have a case pending and you haven't received a summons, that should be a mistake. So I would encourage you to contact the district court administration and find out what's going on with your case. But I think all of them have been scheduled and summonsed, and we've managed all of those. If you have a non-payment of rent situation where you hadn't filed the case before the pandemic, then you're going to be now governed by the phase out and the requirements of the phase out.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and or put it in the chat.
This is Beth, and I answered one of the questions in the chat, but others might be interested in this. The question was, are there any other cities besides Minneapolis and St. Louis Park that have notice requirements? And I believe a number of the cities were watching the legislative process to see if the state would adopt a permanent notice requirement. And since the state adopted a temporary notice requirement, we might see additional municipalities begin to do this, follow suit with Minneapolis and St. Louis Park, and begin to add ordinances that contain requirements. So we're entering, I think, a patchwork phase before the state takes any action, and you'll want to keep track of what's happening in the municipalities where your properties are.
We have another question. Can I give official notice now and wait two or 3 months before I actually file for a non-payment of rent?
So could you give the 15-day, just to clarify, could you give the 15-day notice now and then wait to file? That's the question.
I believe so, but Susan, it looks like you answered the question. If you could unmute yourself and elaborate on your question, that would be awesome.
So if you don't unmute, that's fine. My answer would be it depends, because it depends on have you accepted any, partial payments? Has the tenant, applied in the meantime? What's the status of things? So it would be, and it depends. What happens in that 2 to 3 month period? What I would say is, from my perspective, and this isn't legal advice, but I think it's just a practice pointer for landlords, is that, it's a best practice if you are keeping track of a ledger consistently throughout the tenancy. So rent is due, this is how much was paid, this is how much we charged the late fee and when it was charged, and sort of have like ongoing invoices. And whether you do that in, Excel or just on some sort of program on your computer, or you do it through some sort of, service that provides that, I think that that's best practices. And if you were sending out invoices every single month to your tenants saying, here's rent, here's how much is due, here's how much you owe, that's going to at least cover some of your notice requirements sort of consistently, and you don't have to continually worry about, did I give them the 30 days? Particularly if you include, a disclaimer portion at the bottom that provided all of the other information that you might need. then you just have to worry about giving them advance notice that you were intending to file an eviction. But I think there's so often we have landlords come before us and you've not kept track of anything in records aside from getting ready for the hearing for the non-payment case. But it's much more persuasive if you have consistent records that were being made contemporaneously for when the amounts were due.
Any other questions?
Just one more question. Will you come back again sometime in the year as we're navigating this phase out of the eviction process?
Sure.
Things are changing pretty rapidly.
Sure, anytime.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you very
I
much.
can hang out a little bit and listen if anybody comes up with a question. I'll just have it kind of on in the background. So thank you for inviting me, Beth. I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming. I asked Seasai and Richard if I could just insert one little update that I thought might be relevant to many of the people who are participating in this, and just going to take a minute or two to draw something to your attention. Many of us have been following the whole eviction moratorium off-ramp process. At the same time, there's been a utility disconnect moratorium process that's been happening more quietly. And many of the utility companies in Minnesota were instructed not to disconnect households during the moratorium. Effective today, those utility companies can begin disconnecting households again. And we're aware that sometimes the utilities are in the landlord's name. And if that's the case, you would need to make arrangements with your utility company to avoid any kind of disconnection. If the utility is in your tenant's name, that may impact you as well. And it might be wise for you to share information with your tenant about the disconnection. And people have gotten accustomed to those disconnect notices not meaning anything. Effective today, they do mean something. If a household has a pending application with this emergency assistance link, then the utility company cannot disconnect. If the tenant has an application with Rent Help MN that includes the utility portion, I just got an email during this workshop from Commissioner Ho that the Public Utilities Commission is asking utilities to consider a pending application with Rent Help MN as a reason to hold off on that disconnection notice. And then the final piece about the utilities, McKnight Foundation is funding, this just happened on Friday, the mediation programs to provide not only mediation services between landlords and tenants, but mediation services between utility companies and households. And that starts today. And I believe that Madeline has a slide with information about how to contact Community Mediation Minnesota, but I'll put that information in the chat box as well. And I will watch and see if there are any questions about this utility moratorium off-ramp process. But I think at this point, we will turn things over to Richard McLemore. And Richard McLemore is with McLemore Holdings. And we mentioned at the beginning that Project Hope is a 13 organization collaborative that is helping both landlords and tenants navigate this period and access whatever COVID resources are out there to be able to remain financially whole and to remain housed. And from the very get-go, Richard was the one who indicated we need to provide assistance to landlords with this application process and navigating this process as well, given landlords and tenants are in this together right now. So Rich had that foresight, and he's the one that started these monthly workshops, and we'll turn things over to Rich here. and he can answer questions about Rent Help MN, and he's going to provide an overview of how you get your properties registered in the Rent Help MN system. So thank you, Rich. Over to you.
Thank you, Beth. I appreciate it. Hello, everybody, once again, for joining us today with Project Hope Landlord Assistance Training. We went through a lot of information today. And before I jump into the actual training, which is recorded, we'll just open up the recording and we'll view how we register, add properties, add users, which if we're owners, those users would be people who may work for us or family who work under that umbrella or your company as most likely a property manager. So then how to add users, and then there's some information in there about checking accounts and things of that nature. Who has some time at the end for questions? Yes, we should have some time at the end for questions. So if you can, please wait for those. I did notice in the chat, and I know a couple other people chimed in as well on some Rent Pacific questions, on some Rent Help MN Pacific questions. So we'll make sure we get to those right after this video. Before we get into this video, there was a hand up. I just want to make sure we respect everyone's time and participation. Can you please unmute if you did not have your question answered? There was a hand up and I saw it and then it must have went down. So maybe it was answered, but I want to give you a second or two. Please unmute if your question was not answered. You had your hand up maybe about 5 minutes ago. Okay, we will get, oh, I'm sorry, someone speaking?
I apologize. Yeah, I had my hand up. I'm not sure if it's relevant right now. My question is, I applied as a landlord for Zero Balance project, and my tenant applied on Rent Help Minnesota, and the Zero Balance project sent that my application was withdrawn because my tenant applied for Rent Help Minnesota, and it's kind of confusing because the funds are available under both programs. And whoever gets the application first, I think, should be processing it. I guess that's my sort of a question.
I hear you, and that's a valid question. Now, that's happened quite a few times where maybe the landlord didn't know or the tenant didn't know, right? But you are correct. As Rent Help MN is a state system. Some of our other local, like county or city rental assistance programs, if they're getting that same funding, if you put in, it's considered a duplicate application. If you put in an application for one program that's funded from the same place as another application, Rent Help MN is going to trump that. However, you are correct on one thing. You said if you put an application one place before the other. So kind of a general information, if you're thinking about it and you haven't actually put in an application, meaning you guys haven't registered and applied with Rent Help MN yet, and you want to consider maybe a different portal like Zero Balance, it is your choice. What I would say is don't start one if you're going to do the other. Don't even enter it into it. A lot of people feel like we'll put in multiple applications and all of these different programs and just see who wins the race. And that's not how this federal funding works. It all comes from the same pot of bigger funding, really kind of a high level, but eventually it gets back to those administrators or those accountants who are going to see that as duplicate funding. And like you just experienced, sir, it's gonna push out your application on another program. And really what it does is it delays payment. So if you can't, try to avoid the duplicate applications, because a lot of these programs are funded through the same pot of money, even though they have different names. All right, so I want to save some time for questions at the end. So I really want to get into the video because it's about 15, 20 minutes long. There's nothing pressing. I'm gonna go ahead and start and we'll talk about some things afterward. So when you log on, this is what you'll see. They have a resource tab right here that has templates for any documents that you may be missing, either on the landlord side or on the tenant side. There's a couple of things a landlord's gonna need, specifically 3 things, and there's gonna be 5 to 6 things that a tenant's gonna need. Where you see the learn more in the top right corner, that's where you actually apply for this program. Both landlords and tenants will start at this home screen and hit that button. Once you go from the home page, you will click in the top right corner where it says apply. This is the screen that will come up. Once this screen comes up, you have a tenant application here, but you also have a landlord registration here. Now, this should actually be owners/landlords, okay? Because what would happen is, as a owner, or a landlord with authorization to register this property, this company, right? You would click on here, okay, and it will begin a registration process. Now, once again, this is for the owner or a landlord who has authorization to start this process. It's a pretty straightforward term. Kit Rogers is the owner, okay, or authorized representative. Pretty simple email, a password with 15 characters minimum, and their phone number. You would register. What would happen is once we hit this registration button, an email would be sent to whatever email is here. So it would go to Kit Rogers with a link. That link would take us back to this page. But for training purposes, it just directs us purposely. So folks, once you register your property, look for the email that will link you to your account. And now you're done. Your account is registered. As an owner, you have an account with Rent Help Minnesota now. But the first step once you have an account is to add your property or your properties if you have several. Today, we're just going to add one for simplicity's sake, right? But if you have several, you could either start here in the right top-hand corner and it turns green as you go over it, or right here in the middle. Either button works and they both do the same thing. And it's just kind of a 4-step process as you see, where you'll talk about your properties and your related companies. So it's going to talk about property and company information. We're going to talk about payment information or how your payments are made. It's going to talk about inviting users. So Kit Rogers is the owner, and we're going to add his first property. He has 2, just my apartments, and he calls it Uno, 123 Main Street, New Hope, Minnesota, 55427. All right, and the county is Hennepin. This is the point where we are either a property owner or a property manager. If we're a property owner, it's going to ask us in first person. The only difference is if we're a property manager, it's asking who owns the property, right? But it's the same information, right? So sticking with property owner, I own this property. I'm Kit Rogers, right? I'm registering my property right now. This is my first one, right? And as a property, I have a company name, right? That coincides with my EIN. And then it's gonna ask for a phone number and it automatically populates the owner's name. It says the property owner's company address as it appears on your W-9. Now, this is very important, folks. The address you put in here as your company address coincides with your W-9, which they're going to ask you to upload later. And it's important because this is the only address where they'll send payments. For the company address, it's 456 Trust Lane. We are going to tab over. The city is Apple Valley, Minnesota, zip code Apple Valley 55124. We would usually put in maybe a property manager's address if it's a bigger property. If you have several properties, if you have multiple properties, you have a portfolio of properties, most likely you have a property manager. So what you would do is you would just put in your property manager's company name, their phone number, their address, business address, city, zip code, and then of course the state, and that would be it. Property manager's information. That's all you need from your property manager, right? But let's say this is a mom and pop shop because I put in my home address in Apple Valley. So most likely this is a smaller operation. I manage these properties on my own. When I set up all my properties LLC a few years ago, you know, I had to use my home address. So we're not going to put any property information in there right now because I manage this myself. So now it asks, are you sure? Now, this is important, landlords. It's asking, are you sure? Because once again, if you hit this button, you cannot go back. That's one of the things about this system. Once you register your account and then you set up your first property or multiple properties, you cannot go back and change anything, okay? But we know we did this one correctly. So it's telling us that we're to the second part of this application where we are talking about money. Payments, how are payments going to be made? So select the program. It is a rental assistance program. Which company will receive the funds? and the 1099 from us, meaning what address once again, right? Okay, but we only have one company name in here, All My Properties LLC. Okay, so then we'd go down here and we'd have our tax ID. And then right here, if you do not have a W-9 within the last year, they're only good for 1 year, right? So if you don't have a W-9 within the last year, you can download one right here, fill it out, maybe use a Scan Genius, maybe use your own scanner, and then upload that back so you have that document. W-9. So then we'd have that form uploaded, and then it says select a payment method. Minnesota Housing and Finance, they've been very specific that they prefer automated payments. They've just been very direct with that. They will send a check to you. There's no timeline on that. But for the purposes of this training, we are going to talk about sending an automated payment, right? So we're not going to talk about checks today. It's pretty straightforward. If you want to check, you have an address down, they will send you a hard check, but they cannot give you a time. We cannot give you any timelines on that because we do not know. They will not tell us. So the first thing you do is set up your account. Is going to a checking, a savings account. For us, it's checking. Kit wants us in checking. We have a routing number here, and then we have to confirm it. Of course, we have our account number now we need to put in, and then we will confirm that as well. What it's asking for is an ACH form that needs to be filled out, which you can click here, or you can went into the resource tab and printed it out from there, but you can click here where it'll open up a form and you can fill it out and then print that out. But they are asking you to have an electronic copy of a filled out ACH form. So if you do not have one with your company, you can click on here and get that form, get it printed out, scan back in, and you would upload it here. Or you could do a voided check. So for the purposes of this training, I am just going to do a voided check. So now we have all the information that they require. Inviting users. Now remember when we started this off, I was talking about have at least one user. If you're the only person on this property, I understand, but please have at least one backup user. So if anything happens to go wrong with your account, not saying it will, but if anything happens with your access, it's nice to have another way to get into your account to check the status of your applications. So you would go here and you would check a user. Pretty straightforward. The user needs an email because they're going to be invited. Once I hit send, it's going to send that email to the individual with a link that will now give them access to this account. When they click on that link, they will be to set up an account and they will have access, right? They will literally be to go in and see everything you see. All right, so with that being said, we are going to say the user's name. Using my own so we can get through this. And then it puts the email in there for me already. And it asks me, is this individual a property owner, maybe a co-owner, a partner, or the property manager? It's Maria, or property manager. For this role, Richard is a property, well, I'm sorry. For this role, we're going to say Richard is a co-owner, which, you know, as far as access goes, it doesn't make much of a difference, folks. It doesn't make much difference. They will still have the same access, as that's what I'm saying. We are going to save and continue. And it says that your property has been created. Right? After you're done, you will be redirected to your home page, right? To review your property information. They want you to make sure it's correct. And everyone should be seeing our property, right? So starting from the left side, you have your property ID. If you have any questions about your property or anything went wrong or you need to change anything, you will reference it by this property ID. So you'll register by this property ID. We have the property name, just my apartments. Number 1, we could have a number 2, we could have a number 3, we could have a number 77, right? Our property address, property owner with address that coincides with W-9, and then property manager. If there was a property manager, this would be a different address, meaning tenants that applied for this program, we would be to see that status here, along with an update. Now, to see the update, we would go to this tab right here, meaning where are they at along this process of being approved for rental assistance. We are going to start a tenant application. This is the part where we want to get consent though, folks. You want to let your tenant know that you're doing it on their behalf, because the only way to send a message to the tenant, letting them know that this process is started, is by email. So if we don't let them know the email is coming, we shouldn't assume that they're going to check their email to know that an application has been started on their behalf. So the first part of it would be selecting the property. Select the program, which is COVID-19 Emergency Rental Assistance. There's County Pacific here, but for this training, we're just going to do this top one. And then then a list comes up where we just have to fill in the information. Just getting by. And their email is head of household phone number, and then the building address, 123 Main Street. And as you see, once again, addresses start popping up. If your address was in there, this is a test portal, but if your address was already in, it would come up and all you'd have to do is drop down and click on it. So building unit, you would put the tenant's unit, it's in New Hope. Building state is in Minnesota, and the zip code and Independence County. Okay, now this is a part where I want to spend just a couple of minutes on. This is where we put what is owed. And as you see, it goes all the way back to April 2020, and then it automatically populates 3 months forward. How do we apply for future rent payments? It automatically puts it on here for you. So as you see, it already has it till September. So when you're applying for the late rent, make sure you apply all the way through to whatever months that you know the tenant will need, right? Okay, so let's just, for the sake of this, we are in June. Let's say that this tenant was late for May. The rent is $900 a month, right? And if we look up here, the next box would be amount paid by the tenant. Let's say that's 0. And then this is going to be our late fees here, which we'll see as our late fees due. Make sure we put those in. Any late fees or payments due, you need to put on this rent ledger. If you do not put them here, the state will not reimburse you. So for this place, it's going to be a $40 late payment. And then it will total it for you, which lets you know that this tenant so far owes $940. So for May and June, we would have our late payments. But then for the rest of the months, when we're talking about the future rent owed, there would only be the rental portion. The terms and agreements, want to read through, definitely want to do. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's pretty much asking for your consent. And then you sign it below is that you are okay with applying for this program. Now, this is a toggle button. It's not going to move until you sign your name. So you don't have to click on or anything like that. Just come down here and you would sign your name. Right? And then it's automatically going to move to green once it approves your signature as a person authorized to start this application, right? And that is pretty much it, folks. It's a simple one-page process. And what this is going to do, it is going to push this application via email to your tenant. And then they will see it. The application has been created now. It is being emailed to the tenant. And then they would have to pick up the part of their application and complete it. You cannot upload any documentation on their behalf. All documentation has to come from the tenant, unfortunately, meaning that one pager that you started on your tenant's behalf, you did get the process started. However, they will have to complete it by uploading all the documentation. So they will still need that documentation from you to complete the application or successfully complete that application. Okay, hello everybody. So we are back. There's a couple of clarifying questions or a couple of clarifying things I would like to go through before we get to questions. I did see some questions in the chat, but I was watching a video because Rent Help MN as a system, it has changed. It has changed a bit, like most computer systems, when they find out there's a glitch or when there's something that's not working, they change it. So just a couple of clarifying things to make sure we're all on the same page. When you apply for Rent Help MN, when you go in and you're going to Rent Help MN, we showed you the website in the beginning of the video. And I talked about the right corner where it's learn more now. That used to be where to apply. Now, when you apply, you go to Rent Help MN's website and you will scroll down to about the middle of the website and you'll see two buttons, one for landlords and one for tenants. And obviously, if you're a landlord, you apply as a landlord. If you're a tenant, you apply through the tenant portal. One other thing is the W-9. They have a W-9 template on there. And what I was talking about as far as clarification is that it's a fillable form. However, to make it legally binding, you have to sign it either with a legitimate electronic signature, or you would have to actually print out the form sign it by hand, and then either scan it back in, however you choose to scan it back in, and then save that form back into that file as a well, you know, a legally binding W-9. And then the last thing where I put in there, where if you do not get the rent payments correct, that they locked application, you won't be to change that. Initially, it was a very hard application where everything was locked up and they just took the numbers that are on the application. As we've gone through this process, they've realized that folks are not going to get it right. We're not robots. We may make some mistakes, right? So with that in mind now, what I'll tell you is if you happen to do that ledger portion where you're putting in your rent amounts and you happen to mess up your late payment, or you fail to put a late payment on there, or you messed up that rent for whatever month, a processor for Rent Help MN will be in contact with you either way, because they have to verify some of the payment information and some of those numbers they're seeing. So don't worry if you don't put in the right information. I mean, do your best to get as accurate as possible. But if you happen to make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. A processor from Rent Help MN will be contacting you. And excuse me, then at that time, you can talk about whatever errors or whatever things you might have learned since that date of applying. And with that, that's all the changes that I've seen. Since that video is pretty good, can we just jump into questions? I haven't been monitoring the chat, so
I have a
can someone
question.
help me out?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
This is Berkema Jackson speaking. And I observing a video stating that the tenants are responsible for uploading their documents. Do you mean their ledger, their and their back rent that they need to upload?
Yes, ma'am. So as it's a tenant-driven portal, I know we said it a lot, and it may not make the clearest thing, right? What that means is the documentation, the copies, the uploads. You can fill out the electronic ledger, meaning put in the late rent and the late payments, and then, you know, things like that, even future rent if you so choose. But when they push that application via email to the client resident to complete the application, in completing that, they're going to have to send or upload those proofs. Yes, that rent, that lease agreement, that rent ledger, yes, things like that, their ID, utility bills, and then of course their proof of income to see if they qualify for this program. So yeah, they will be responsible for uploading all documentation. So as landlords, it'd be in our best interest to make sure they have a updated copy of their lease and a late payment or a ledger that details the months they're late, including any fees, late fees.
So would that tenant have to go under Rent Help themselves and submit these documents?
It depends. If you start the application like we showed in the video where you started, you sent it to them, they're going to get an email with a link on it, and that link's just going to open up the application to where they need to complete, meaning where they can go and put in their income stuff and upload those forms, right? But if they're starting, obviously, if they're starting the application from scratch, they would have to go to the Rent Help MN website, or they could call Project Hope and we could help them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're very welcome, ma'am.
There's another hand up from Z Miller. If you'd like to unmute yourself and ask a question.
Yes, thank you. I have a post-application question. We've had a tenant apply and had accidentally received overages on payment, and we had contacted Rent Help to hopefully get some direction on how to reimburse these funds back to the program or back to wherever it needs to go, but we haven't received any instruction as to how to reimburse these overages. Do you have any sort of direction or any place we can go to get more information on that?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Miller. If I was you, there's a landlord assistance line. It's oh, someone help me out. What is it? Field support. So it's landlord, and I can just type it in, but it's landlord support. Let me see. 1 second. It's easy if I type it.
And I think I know which email you're referring to, the landlords at renthelp.org or .com.
Yep, and I'm putting that for anyone. I'm sure landlords know about it, and I understand, and I've heard that they've been not the best at responding. But Mr. Miller, I would advise you to start that. And the reason I'm saying that is to make sure you cover your bases, so you let them know. And from what I was told, even though they're kind of dragging a little bit, it's a little behind with that email portal. It is being monitored not only by the folks that are supposed to look at it, but the supervisors to make sure that these emails are being answered. Yeah, so I would start there. I really can't think of anywhere else to go because, as you folks know, there's not a lot of contact information around Rent Help MN, and the supervisors we know may not want a direct email. But with that being said, I did write that down, that there's nowhere to go, because you're not the only person that's told us they've gotten overpaid or missed, some people's received other people's checks. So I think we will bring that up in our next meeting, which will be today at 3 o'clock, and see if maybe they have some answers. And Beth, if you could chime in, maybe a little bit more than I, and maybe a contact information. But this is kind of the first time we've been asked, because payments it's in the last month they started coming out. So this is still new with getting this system correct.
Rich, they have come across this problem, and they have created a direct line called payments at renthelpmn.org.
Thank you. I remember seeing that. Thank
landlords
you.
Contact.
We saw that in our notes. Do we have the phone number that we can put in the chat, Seaside? Do you happen to have that? I know I saw that in the notes we sent out. If not, I can look it up in a second. And we will put that in the chat, because you're absolutely right, Beth. Thank you for reminding me. Once again, like I said, this is a new issue, and we had a meeting last week, and they talked about having a line that people can call for payment issues. And I thought there was an email as well. So let me look at our notes, and I will get that back to you. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time.
No problem.
It looks like we have another hand up from Andrea.
Yes, I've applied a while ago, and it's my understanding of what you described that the tenant actually has to link their application with mine by responding to an email. So they're supposed to get some kind of email when I fill out my part, and that's how the applications get linked up, because I don't see any applications next to my property. So the property next to the right, it says 0 applications. And also, since I applied a long time ago, I thought maybe I didn't do a property, and I added the same property I added second time. So now it shows 2 properties. In fact, it's just 1 property. So is there a way to delete 1 property? Is there a way to add it? That's my questions.
Yes. So you're saying that you registered for an account, you put your properties under that registered account, so you have property showing up, but then when you look on those specific properties or property, you're not seeing any of your residents under that property, correct?
Yeah, I don't see any like applications like
right
there, because I was not familiar how this system works. I didn't quite scroll down for the properties. I didn't notice initially that I already filled out the property. So I added my property second time, and then it allowed me to fill out the same information about the rent ledger, and I've uploaded my W-2. So now I don't know if anything changes, because I'm moving, and I don't know which address I placed on the W-9 versus the initial W-9 that I put on the first property.
So let's do this. Because you could have duplicated your account, and that's happened before where we've had to clean up some accounts. When this first started, obviously this was new for all of us. So if you can you send me an email? I'm going to put in the chat. It's our landlord assistance line, and we'll get into this offline a little bit about what's the specific issues, what's your portal looking like, if you have multiple portals open, and we'll try to clean that up a little bit.
Yeah,
okay?
sure. Yeah, sure. I can email it. Basically, it's the same portal. It's the same. I log in with the same account. It just shows my same property shows 2 times.
And that's what I mean. There may be some duplication there. So let's get that taken care of, because we don't want that interrupting payments or anything else. And like you said, if you have 2 W-9s, and even though you have the same address, if you have 2 W-9s and they have different addresses, that's going to cause a problem too. So yeah, let's and what I'll need for you, I'm going to ask for like your portal ID, and I'll tell you about that. And then if you have we don't have any residents, so we'll just talk about getting your portal ID and getting that cleaned up. If you can just send me an email with your contact information, we'll talk. Okay.
Okay. How do I send an email? I see it's in chat.
I put it in the chat, and then just remind me of your question that you have 1 account, but there's multiple duplicate properties under there, and you're just making sure everything's okay, and you'd like us to kind of look at it. And and even if I don't remember, we'll talk.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Hi, I have a quick question. Sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'm Roxanne Manahan, and my renter's already said that she's applied for renthelpmn.org. I haven't seen any proof of that as of yet, but as far as my portion, since she already applied, Do I need then to put in all the information concerning her?
I'm sorry, I'm a little.
So she's already applied for rent help MN. She
Right,
made her
correct.
application. I was waiting to hear something from them about my, for me to apply, but I see on the video that I can apply already. But you had mentioned near the end of the video presentation that then you put in the information about the renter, but she already applied. So do I need to do that portion?
You do not. No, this is that is if landlords are getting started to get their properties and they want to kind of kickstart the residents. It gives them an opportunity to send them a started application, so then the resident can just complete it. And it helps the resident in the fact that a lot of things like the property address, your name and information is already in that application. So it helps kind of in line with our the other gentleman that asked a question a minute ago. It helps with the address because your properties are linked. The applications are linked via address. So if the resident's not clear on their address, or even they do something small like forget the east and the west, that can mess up the system, right? So when the landlord initiates the application, sometimes it makes it a little easier on the tenant because that information is already in there. But if your tenant has already started the application, you do not need to do anything but wait for the processor to call to start verifying information. Now, if they successfully completed an application, not just started it, because they are going to need that ledger and they're going to need that lease from the landlord. So it'll be a little hard to complete application without the information, I'm saying.
I've given her all of that. So essentially, I don't have to do anything more. But how do I know for certain that it's actually gone through? I mean, I have no link since I didn't register to see that she actually applied.
When residents apply for rent help men, they're given an option and they can always go back into their account because they're asked to make an account just like landlords. And in doing that, they can always go back and there's a button over there for a landlord letter pretty much that lets you know or lets the landlord know, whoever they are, that this resident has applied for rent help men, obviously as a protection as well. So if they've applied and once again successfully applied and completed the application, they should be to print out that letter for their landlord.
Okay, great, thanks.
You're welcome.
Hey,
All right, we
Rich,
have
there's
about
another
2 or 3
question.
minutes.
Tenant claims they applied for rent assistance. Will the tenant receive a case number that they can give to their landlord as proof?
They'll have an application ID. That would be it. It would be an application ID. I don't know if the application ID is necessarily proof. I think that letter is a little better. So maybe you ask for that letter because they can just print it out anytime. Okay. Any more? Seaside in our last few minutes?
Looks like Calvin has his hand up. If you want to.
Perfect. Mr. Prince.
Hello. My questions are probably similar to what we just covered. It's regarding, as a property manager, my dashboard. I have entered about 25 properties and I'm currently seeing, 15 tenants in their applications. Helps me track where they're at, see the different statuses, answer questions as needed. But there are, a half a dozen or so tenants out there that have applied, at least sent me, like you talked about, the landlord letter or screenshots showing they've successfully applied. But those are not linked to my dashboard. How do I resolve that? Because I would like to have them all there and track them all, obviously.
Definitely. So you can do it one of two ways. You can do it one of two ways. The easy way, which way you probably wouldn't be interested in, is the processor is going to call you eventually and they're going to clean all that up. They're going to just ask you, hey, is there any other properties, anything we're missing, right? So when that processor calls you about the current properties to check on, the late fees and the rental amounts, verify those things, you can have them clean all that up then. Once again, they have to call the landlords and verify that information. So then they can do it at that time. However, if you want to be proactive and kind of get some of that stuff cleaned up, that's one of the things that we can do with our landlord assistance. A lot of times, if you can get us their application ID, which is ID they have tied to the rental assistance application, and then your portal ID, which is, of course, you have that signifies you as a landlord, you have a registered account, that number. Get us those two numbers, we can link those accounts and start talking to them, because then that helps the processors on the back end, because that's already taken care of. So it's really up to you. If you'd like to use our email, then we could talk about what property or what residence applications ID we need added under your property portal. We can definitely have that discussion and see if we can help you out.
Thank you.
All right. Yes, sir, Ms. Prince. All right. Seaside, do we have anyone
looks
else?
like
I guess we're a couple minutes over, maybe another minute or two, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone who came. I know some people probably have to head out, but thank you everyone for coming. And for those who have more questions and want to stay longer, feel free. And those who have to go, thank you so much for coming, and thank you to our presenters.
Thank you. So you want to take maybe 5 minutes? Maybe 5 minutes. Just try to see if we can clean up. I don't know how many questions there are. So let's see, hand up. Are you looking in the chat, Cesar, or would you
Yeah, it
like me
looks
to
like
kind of
there's
work the
another
chat?
hand just got raised from Andre.
So I can
Can I
go to
get
the hands
Robert?
raised?
Robert has had a question too. Maybe we'll come to Robert's question after Andre.
Okay, yeah, we want to make sure we're getting everyone in. Andre, please unmute
Yes,
yourself.
I was just wondering, how do I get to the portal ID? How do I get my portal ID? So when I'm emailing to you, I have the application number for my tenant, and how do I identify myself with my portal ID?
Yeah, when you go into your account, you should see it in the top left hand or right hand corner. It kind of depends, but it's going to be either a 4 or 6 digit number. All right, or you'll see it right next to your properties. Or depending on looking at your phone or a laptop. But yes, it'll be a number associated with your account. You'll only see it in one place. Does that make sense? So you have to go into your account to look for that number.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. And then we were saying was there a question in the chat we missed?
Yeah, Robert was asking, do you need to register each apartment or the property?
Very good. Very great question. So it's kind of a multi-step process, right? The first step is registering yourself as a landlord, just saying I'm a landlord and this is my information. And then under that registration as a landlord, that's when you'll start putting each individual property. So yes, you do have to register each property because like you're hearing from the other questions, that's how eventually the applications are tied to the property based on those addresses and those numbers I'm talking about. Mainly the property address. That's why it's so important for tenants to put in the correct property address, because if they happen to invert something or forget the east and the west or anything like that, it literally creates a new address in the system. So that's one of the nuances or kinks to the system. The addresses have to be accurate. Okay. And I see another hand raised. Do we want to go to Mr. Prince while we're looking at the chat, or do we want to come back? Well, let's go to Mr. Prince. I see Prince. Did you get your question answered on your hands up before? He may have got it answered.
No, it's new. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
This regards the process and the lengthiness. We've had people that applied in April, and some of those are still in pending status, or et cetera. And I know one of my tenants have told me blatantly that, oh, they're asking me too much information. I don't want to provide that information. Well, they are under the impression they've applied, but from our status, if you don't complete the application, it can sit in pending status for months and months and months. And that's kind of putting a landlord in a vulnerable position. How long are we expected to accept pending as a legitimate answer as a landlord?
If I'm hearing I want to make sure I'm answering this correctly. So you said how long, maybe let me ask you this way. You said, how long are you willing to accept having pending as far as before you want to file, before you?
Correct. Correct.
Okay. So if it's in pending status, unfortunately, you won't be to file, but I feel like I'm almost hearing like, is that believable after a certain amount of time? So in that case, that's why I'd advise you to make sure you get that letter from your residents, that they have that official letter from the Helping Men saying that they are part of the program. It can take, we've seen about 3.5 months before payment, right? So that means sometimes it is 2.5, maybe 3 months before the processors start reaching out to ask those clarifying questions. Yes, so I do apologize. It's an incredibly lengthy process. It is slow. But they always tell us the funding's there, so we regurgitate that message. They do have hundreds of millions of dollars in there. And then what else I did is I actually put in the chat earlier on, I put a dashboard in there, which is just general information. But what's great about it is it shows people how much is paid out, where they're going, and it's specific by like county. So you can start looking and seeing, okay, what counties are getting paid? Is this really working? And it's a running kind of clock on what they're spending. So you have an idea that this program is working and that they are getting funds out to landlords. So if you're interested, please use that link to watch the Rent Help Admin dashboard. And then it says, can you answer the
We have
question
one
from
more.
Suzanne? Is that the one you saw, Seaside? Can you answer a question from Suzanne?
Yes.
Okay.
If you have an unmarried couple renting, so she said, I have an unmarried couple renting my property. Do I start 2 separate applications, assigning 50% to each of them of past due rent and late fees?
It depends how the lease is signed up. If you have a roommate agreement for the lease, well, then it's separated. But if the lease signifies that it's one person, maybe had a house with someone on the lease with them, then it's just one application. Hope that answers your question. Okay.
Any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and or put in the chat.
I don't see any hands up. I don't see any questions. Okay, well, I think we got somewhere today. Great, great, great. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure I put my hope and end. And I'm gonna put my email in there again. So if anyone has any specific questions, I understand this may not be the venue for you to ask personal questions about your properties, and we completely understand that. That's why we put our email in there. So if you have any specific questions about your Rent Help Admin portal, please don't hesitate to email us and let's get those questions answered. So I put it in there again, and I'm also putting our contact number in there. So if you have any questions, just like to call us up. This is for, of course, tenants, but if you hit a button at the end, it lets you know that we have a landlord line as well. So there's a landlord option with this number. So I think with that, Seaside, I think we'll wish everyone a great day, right? I mean, that's all we have. If we don't have anything else in the chat, correct? We have September workshop day. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Good question, Beth. Do we have a September workshop day? I'm not sure we do yet. Beth, maybe you want to chime in. I know we looked at our emails today and we haven't got a chance to kind of narrow that down yet. If we looked at the first day, I'm sorry, I'm looking right now. We know it's a holiday.
Doing the first Monday of the month, and I realized the first Monday is Labor Day, so we probably
it's a holiday.
Doing that in September, but we'll do the email blast and the constant contact newsletter blast again, but it won't be on Labor Day.
It definitely will not be. Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us today. It was great. Thank you to all my project co-partners, co-workers putting on this amazing event. I hope everyone that joined us got something from it today. And once again, if you have any question from us, either call us or send us an email, and we will do our very best to assist you. So thank you and have a great day. Bye-bye.